welcome to Tips and Tricks. I'm Debbie Nelson with Together SC, and I'm delighted to see all of you. Today, we are here for another episode, and I'm so delighted to introduce you to a good friend, Forrest Alton. Hello, Forrest.
Hey, Debbie, great to see you again.
It's great to see you. Forrest has been with Together SC for a long time. You've been a board member, you've been a board chair. So I'm just delighted that you're now a part of our consultant collaborative. And I'm glad to hear a little bit more about what you're doing these days. 1,000 Feathers, that's your business, right?
It is indeed. And, just this summer, we turned 5 years old. It's hard to believe it's been that long. And you're absolutely right. My tenure with Together SC was much longer, right? I mean, I was part of the organization when I was the CEO of a nonprofit. Then I became a consultant and a business partner and now a business owner. I joke, but with nothing but love, that the only way Madeline would let me leave the organization was to move out of state. And even now we're still connected, right? So I'm glad and always happy when Together SC reaches out and there are things that we can do together. But 1,000 Feathers is our consulting firm, as you mentioned, launched in 2016. And 5 years in now, I would say, in a word, Debbie, headed into 2022, our work is about transformation. If I was trying to find a single word to describe it, that is over the years where we have found an ability to make the greatest contribution to the field. And, we push organizations all the time, whether it's in strategic planning or learning or trainings. We push organizations to find the places where they can operate at their highest levels of contribution. We're often saying, find your optimal condition where you can get optimal results. And over the years, we've had to take a bit of our own medicine, right? Figure out the places that we can have the greatest impact on organizations and individuals. And that's in the transformation space of organizations, yes, but also, and more commonly these days, transformation of communities and even entire systems. Now, what's interesting about this, Debbie, is when you think about it and break it down, in order to transform communities and systems, we have to be able to transform the organizations that exist within those communities and systems. And to be able to transform those organizations, oftentimes we're talking about individual level transformation, whether that's leadership or staff or board, right? And so often all of those roads lead us back to thinking differently, helping individuals and organizations think a little bit differently about the challenges and opportunities ahead of them. That's about as brief as I could get that synopsis, but that's where our work is these days, and it's keeping us very busy.
So this leads to a tips and tricks question. You're talking about thinking differently, right? So it sounds like there's something to that. So how do we do this? How do we think differently about the challenges we face, the opportunities we face in the sector?
Yeah, it's a really, really important question, especially right now, right? Especially the time and place and space we're in. There's been a lot thrown at us, a lot of changes, a lot of curveballs, a lot of things that none of us could have predicted over the last few years. And of course, there's really serious public health implications, ramifications, in the health and well-being of our communities. But it's also been very disruptive to our personal lives, to the organizations we work in, to our communities. And it's really forced us to think differently, right? We haven't been able to just put our head down and plow through. We haven't been able to just, the proverbial hide under the desk and wait for the storm to pass and wait till this makes me cringe, and I know some of my friends cringe, return to normal. I'm not sure that our best play right now is to just put our head down and wait to return to normal. So we've had to really push on how do we think differently? How do we learn? How do we approach challenges and opportunities differently? And that line of thinking has gotten us really involved recently in a lot of work centered on the concept of organizational resilience. We define that, and others certainly define that, as an organization's ability to do three things. Number one, respond effectively to change. Number two, adapt successfully, both to new and unforeseen conditions and circumstances. And number three, and this is the part of resilience that a lot of people forget. We think about 1 and 2, our ability to bounce back and respond. But number three, our ability to be in position to seize new opportunities. That's also part of resilience and something we have to really be focused on. And again, those things should all sound familiar to those of us engaging with this tips and tricks segment, right? Responding effectively to change, adapting successfully to new and unforeseen conditions. We haven't been able to put our heads down. I do cringe quite literally whenever I hear organizations say, we're so proud, we haven't changed a thing. We're doing exactly the same thing we were doing in 2019. We made it through. And it always makes me take a breath and pause and think, the families you serve, the communities you serve, the issues you're working on are not the same today that they were 2 and 3 years ago. And so if you're doing the exact same thing you were 2 or 3 years ago, you might think that looks like success, but to me, it says you haven't really responded effectively to the changes that have been presented to your organization. And I think that's a dangerous place for folks to be right now. Again, how do we think differently about the challenges and opportunities ahead of us? And that's where we get into this question and get into some of these issues. Knowing that we're limited in time, at least by this segment, right? I could say 1,000 things about how we think differently, but I'm going to focus on one strategy that we have found really helpful, a tip, if you will, or maybe it's a trick. I'm not sure which one it is, Debbie, but it classifies as one. And that is the Foresight Model. And the Foresight Model comes from the Cranfield School of Management in the UK. And the Foresight Model is linked to concepts of organizational resilience, again, responding effectively to change. But we've also found it to be helpful when organizations are thinking about starting a new program, developing a new something, right? Planning a new event, or shifting their focus area, or maybe even dealing with a crisis. The Foresight Model and the ways that it teaches us to think can be helpful. So let me go through the 4 sites that are included in the Foresight Model. And a really, really important note here, by the way, is that this Foresight Model and the whole concept of organizational resilience and changing how we think is not just for leaders. This is a concept that should be spread throughout the organization, and all of us should be thinking differently, and using these 4 sites is our suggestion over time. The first one being hindsight. So you're going to hear 4 sites here, as the model suggests. The first one is hindsight. And we're asking the question, what are the things that have worked well that you hope to keep doing, right? Learning the right lessons from the events of the past. Now, we can't ever take this too far, or we get into this sort of begrudging, like, oh my God, we can't change because we've always done it that way. That's not what we're suggesting with hindsight, but we are suggesting learn the right lessons from the past, develop a clear understanding of what's worked well for you in the organization, what hasn't worked. Let me maybe put these 4 sites as we go through, Debbie, into a concrete example. One of the things people are asking us a lot about these days is the return to work, right? When do we come back to work? What is it going to look like? What is this hybrid I keep hearing about? Like, are we coming back to the office or not? Maybe as I go through these, I'll apply the 4 sites to a very concrete example so you can see what it looks like. So in this case, we might say, in hindsight, like, what are the things that worked over the last couple of years, right? Like, we don't have to rush back to the office just because it's the way we used to do it. Have we been able to adjust and work remotely? Maybe yes, maybe no. That's a question organizations have to ask. But also, what are other things in hindsight that have worked? I've heard people say things like, our social media engagement these last couple of years is through the roof. Great. How do we keep doing that? How do we do even more of it? And when we go back to the office, let's not stop doing the things that worked, right? Let's keep looking in that rear view, as it were, learn the right lessons. That's how we use hindsight. The second site is, in fact, foresight. And our wonderful VP of Communications and Strategy, Casey Banks, who many of you know, sort of looks at me with a side eye every time I get here. You can tell this isn't our model, Debbie. We would have never created a model called the Foresight Model and had one of the four sites be Foresight. But, you know, it's not our model. It's just one we use. Nonetheless, foresight is our ability to predict the future, right? What are the future disruptions of our work? And we certainly, knock on wood, hope that we're not dealing with future global pandemics right away. But still, we can anticipate, predict, prepare. Foresight requires us to be able to look ahead, project what's coming, understand those disruptions, and prepare for them. And just think about this in the organization. We know that we've got people in our organization that are good at hindsight. We've got people in our organization that are good at foresight, that are always saying, I hear you, but I'm not sure a year from now or 2 years from now that decision is going to play out. In this example I gave about coming back to work, you know, you can predict reasonably with just a little bit of foresight that a hybrid model is going to create some tension, right? And I'm not, again, suggesting these things are good or bad, but if you're in a situation where half your staff has to come to work every day and half your staff doesn't, foresight would tell us there's probably going to be some people who don't love that, right? How do we predict that challenge? How do we start thinking about it? How do we get out ahead of it? The next two sites, insight and oversight. And I usually talk about insight and oversight together because they really are similar and talk about the current condition. Insight's a bit more subjective, oversight a little bit more objective. Let's talk about insight first. What are the insights? What are the observations you have about the current condition of your work and of your workplace or of the communities you're working in? So we're not talking about the past. We're not talking about the future. We're being laser focused on the current condition. What does insight tell us? What insights do we have? What observations do we have? Are we able to bring people together, step back, assess the current condition, show some situational awareness? What's happening right now we need to be thinking about? And then similarly, again, oversight, but a little bit more objective here, is what processes do we have in place to continue monitoring and assessing our work? We're assessing compliance, we're assessing performance, we're assessing the challenges our staff are having in this moment. And so again, with the lens of coming back to work, or what does the future of work look like? In our insights, we're asking ourselves the question, what about today? What about right now? Are there reasons we have to be back in the office? Are there reasons we don't have to be, et cetera, et cetera? Now, here's the trick. If the foresight model is the tip, I guess here's the trick, Debbie, is the idea here is organizations need to be using all four sites together. I like to think of an image where they're all hooked together and we're never pulling too far one direction or another, right? If all we do is think about predicting the future and we lose the lessons from the past and we lose our insights in the current condition, that's not great. That's like called dreaming, right? If all we do though is use hindsight and all we do is think about the past, we end up, wandering around the halls saying that'll never work. It's not the way we do things here. We've never done it that way. Nobody likes that condition in the extreme either. And if all we do is use insight and oversight and think about the current condition without any thought of the past or the future, you can see why that's problematic as well. So working with organizations to use all four sites simultaneously folds back into concepts of organizational resilience, folds back into concepts of individual and organizational transformation, which can ultimately feed up to overall system and community transformation. That's a tip and a trick folded up into one. I hope that's helpful to some folks. We do full day trainings on these things. We have 6, 9, 12-month engagements with clients on these things. So trying to squeeze it all into 5 or 6 minutes in a quick summary, but however we can be helpful, Debbie, we're always here.
Thank you so much, Forrest. That was extremely helpful. And I really love the way you folded back into this whole concept of how do we think differently. It was really a comprehensive, probably more than a tip and trick. It's really a comprehensive strategy there that I know you would love to help others with. as part of these tips and tricks, we offer your contact information. We encourage folks, if they have questions about what you shared today, to reach out. And certainly if they would like to engage your firm, 1,000 Feathers, in
For
this
sure.
work, we would love for them to reach out to you. So thank you so much for your time and meeting with me today.